Mind Your Career webinar program. My name is Adam Sylvain, and I work with the Alumni Career Development team here at the University of Chicago in Hyde Park. I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar entitled The Non-Technical Founder's Introduction to Tech. Today, we will hear from Booth alumna and entrepreneur, Sophia Matveeva. Sophia is the founder of Enty, a retail tech platform that connects consumers, stylists, and brands. The company won App of the Day by Mashable, and Grazia named Enty one of the world's best fashion tech startups. Sophia also runs the rapidly growing Tech For Non-Techies education network. She has contributed to the Financial Times and The Guardian on entrepreneurship, has a regular column in Forbes. She has also acted as advisor at Chicago Booth's New Venture Challenge and Microsoft X London College of Fashion Incubator. Matveeva also advises brands and retailers on marketing, technology strategy, and consumer behavior. She holds an MBA from Chicago Booth and a BSc in politics from the University of Bristol. You can visit her website at sophiamatveeva.com. Thanks so much, Sophia.
Thank you, Adam. Hello, everybody. So my video should be working with you now. So hi from London, and let's get started. So Adam, well done for pronouncing my name properly. I'm always very impressed that you do that. So as Adam was saying, I founded a tech-based business when I was doing my MBA, and essentially have grown it from a classroom into something that actually genuinely works, makes revenue. We have an app, we have a website, we have an analytics product, and we have our own machine learning algorithm. And I've built all of this, obviously with the support of an amazing tech team, but essentially I'm not a technical founder. So I started my career in the media, worked a bit in private equity, then even in the art world, and then I got my MBA at Chicago Booth. So as you can see, I'm definitely not a developer. So I'm telling you this so you can have some hope that you don't have to be like Mark Zuckerberg to essentially create a tech-enabled business that's doing well. So I've had to learn a lot of what I'm doing on the job, either from the people that I'm working with or by taking courses. And frankly, I learned quite a lot of useless stuff, especially, you know, the U Chicago graduates would just think that we just need to learn everything, take courses, and then there will be nirvana. So that is not the case with technology. It's a kind of never-ending black hole that you could just find yourself down. And so I started teaching these classes, trying to tell entrepreneurs and non-technical professionals who want to work in the tech industry what they really need to understand, what concepts are important, and what they can just leave and forget, because you can't do everything. It's just impossible. So you can read some of the things that I've been writing on the non-techies aspects, especially in Forbes. The stuff I do in the FT and the Guardian is more about entrepreneurship in general. So that's about me. And now I would like to find out about you. So Adam, can we have the polls, please?
Absolutely. Yeah. So our first poll question, really wanting to know what your affiliation is. So if you are a student, staff member, or alumnus affiliated with U Chicago generally, or specifically with the Booth Business School, please let us know. Or if you have no affiliation with the University of Chicago, welcome, and we'd love to know that as well. So please take a few seconds to register your responses, and I'll share out the results. All right, so it looks like we have a majority U Chicago affiliated, 52%, another 41% from joining us from Booth, and then 7% that are friends. So thank you all. Cool. We have one more poll at the start here. And that second poll question, so what is your motivation? What describes your interest in today's topic? What brings you here today? Perhaps you're an entrepreneur. Maybe you have a startup idea but haven't launched just yet. Or maybe you're more broadly interested in learning about tech. A few more seconds for responses there, and I'll share out those results as well. All right. Great. So we've got about 48% that have a startup idea but have not launched yet, 17% that are current entrepreneurs, and 35% that are interested in learning more about tech.
Cool, thank you. So actually, I'm a repeat offender. I did a year abroad at the University of Chicago College, and loved it so much because, you know, it's where fun comes to die, that I came back to do my master's there too. So let's get started. Let's get started. Hang on, what are we doing? 1 second. There we go. The yin and yang of companies. So this is really important. All companies, whether you're making an app or a car or a chair, you need people to make the product and you need people to sell the product. So just figure out which one you are, and then don't pretend to be something that you're not. And what I'm saying is that learning some coding can be a good thing, but unless you decide to completely change career, you don't need to be a coder. That's a skill set you can hire for fairly easily. And unless you're getting really people who are doing really expensive, complicated machine learning algorithms, you can hire this talent fairly cheaply right now, especially if you're doing some kind of basic app or e-commerce company. So if you're really good on the marketing side, the commerce side, that's great. Do that, and then work with people who know how to do the tech. So what you really need to understand is the production process. I think this is the most important. So you need to know what the steps are and who you interact with. This is the same whether you're making an app, a car, or a chair. But where the tech process is different from a car or a chair is that it is cyclical rather than linear. So the example I like to give is if you're making a car, the way this is very simple. So if somebody here is working at Peugeot or something, I'm sure you'll correct me. But essentially, kind of the full process would be something like you get some changes in demographics and you get some changes in tastes. For example, women are getting married later and they have more disposable income. So that means that they might want smaller cars to get around the city in. So you get this idea, you then get a design, that design gets engineered, then manufactured, then eventually taken to showrooms, and then eventually you start seeing what the sales are like. And then once the car is actually sold, you then start getting consumer reports and media reviews. So you only understand how well your product is doing and what consumers think about it, and only when it's actually in the hands of users. And you only really understand how they're using it from anecdotal data. You as GM, you're not going to be sitting there in the car with them, seeing where they're going and what they're doing. With apps, with websites, that bit is completely different. So you know how the apps on your phone tend to update. So I don't know if you would remember when the Uber logo changed. The Uber app on your phone used to look one way and then it started looking another way. Most of us didn't actually have to do anything about that. For most of us, the default setting is that apps update automatically. The reason is that the work to improve it is going on in the background while you are actually still working or sleeping or not doing anything with it at all. So let's discuss how this works. What you need to understand is the concepts that we're going to go into. So the concepts are design, development, and then analytics. We'll go further into this, but essentially those are the big sort of pillars of what we're going to talk about. You need to understand the basics of who does what and how it all fits together. But you yourself generally don't have to write any code. If you want to take some coding classes and you want to see what a backend looks like, you literally want to see a computer taken apart, there is a good free online course from Stanford called CS 101. I took it. I use it to just enhance my understanding, but it is not something that's going to help you actually build a website yourself. So this, my dear friends, is the most important thing that you need to remember. If you just decide that you're going to leave right now, you can do that. Just take a screenshot of this. So this is the cyclical production process that I was talking about. First, you have an idea. Then you go to designers and you create a prototype. You test that prototype, we'll go into this. You then go to give it to developers. You get a back end made and then a front end. Then you release that into the wild, see how people use it, analyze the results, learn from those results. And because you've learned, you're going back to number one, you're seeing where the problems are, so you're coming up with new ideas how to fix those problems. And basically, if you're working in a tech company, or you are a non-technical founder, you're an entrepreneur, this is basically your life. So in a way, it's good because you're always doing something, you're always discovering, you're always learning. But in another way, it's bad because your work is never done. A tech product is never completed. Sometimes you might stop working on it for a little bit to focus on something else because it's good enough, but it is never, ever perfect. Perfection is not a concept, unfortunately, here. So you might have heard the phrase that a product manager is the product CEO. You might have heard this phrase, or you might not have heard of product management whatsoever. It's different from project management, and it's specific to creating tech products. So what is a product manager? A product manager is like the CEO of a product. So they are the person that works with designers, works with developers, works with analysts and community managers. So basically the entire gamut of creation of this app or website. So you're working with people who are making the product. Those are the designers and the developers, and the people who are selling the product. So that's the marketers and the community managers. And you are sitting in the middle, setting the tasks, making sure that people are on time, attempting to keep track, and asking the right questions. This is actually a very hard job because most of the work that people around you are doing is work that you can't do yourself, so you can't really supervise it too much. So this is why what you have to do is you need to understand how to ask the right questions and set the right targets. Also, product managers, as an aside, quite a lot of entrepreneurs, if their company doesn't work out the way they wanted it to, they end up becoming product managers at big tech companies. So for those of you who are thinking of launching a venture and you're considering all the risks, this is just something to think about. Yes, entrepreneurship is super risky, but if you actually create a product, so if you have an app or a website and people use it, in the worst case scenario, you will be able to get a really good job with that experience and make lots of money in another way. So it's not the end of the world. Anyway, so you need to keep your entire product team focused on what I call your North Star. Your North Star is your focus, what your product aims to achieve, your one priority, and it has to be one priority because it's kind of like a to-do list. If you have lots and lots of different priorities, you have no priorities. So for example, your priority right at the beginning, so let's say you're making an app, your priority right at the beginning might be engagement. So once people open the app, how much time do they spend on it? Or once people open the app, how much time do they spend interacting with other people in that app? That could be your first metric. Then, as your company grows, your product metric might change to growth. So how many of your active users are inviting other active users? So you then, as a product manager, need to understand how your product metric aligns with your business metric. That is your job, and it is not the job of your tech team. So this is really, really important. Let's talk about Facebook, because I think most of us are using it, so hopefully this is going to be a fairly clear example. Facebook generally wants people to be engaged on its product. So by engagement, I mean either just simply mindlessly scrolling, just using your thumb, or liking or commenting or interacting with people. Basically just be on the app, stay on the Facebook app or stay on the Facebook site. They want you to be there, and also they want you to be active, because the more likes you're giving, the more data you're sharing about yourself, so the more useful you are. Why is that useful to them? It's because if you're on it for a long time and you're sharing information about your preferences, they can serve you advertising that you're actually going to click on and then buy this product. So you see how one metric, the metric of engagement, and let's say engagement would be time in the Facebook app. That would be one metric of engagement. That then translates to revenue. So if you have a super engaged audience, you can do really good targeted advertising. But it's your job as the product manager or the non-technical founder to make sure that the product North Star aligns with how you're going to get your money. Don't go to your developers and say, make me an app that makes me lots of money via advertising. That is not a product metric. That's something that you should focus on. That's something that you need to do. So this is what your basic tech team looks like. And as you're reading this in horror, don't worry, you don't actually need a separate person to do all of this. So let's just go through very quickly what you actually do 100% need. You don't really need a CTO if you're just launching your startup. What would be so good is if you could have some kind of technical lead. So do you have a friend who is a developer at Facebook? Can they help you out? Can they give you some advice? If you have a technical lead or a technical advisor, you don't need a CTO right at the start. What you do need 100% is you need a designer. Another thing that you absolutely need is you need a backend developer and you need a front-end developer. You need your product to be analyzed, but a lot of the time an analyst can also be a designer or a front-end developer. So that's not necessarily another job that you have to hire for and another job you need to get money for right at the beginning. Data scientist, unless you have a data science company, that's not something you are going to need for a long time, because data scientists need a lot of data. So when you're a tiny startup and your product has been used by 10 people, that's just not the kind of statistically significant number that data scientists can work with. So don't worry about it. Working with your tech team. You need to work in weekly sprints, which for kind of outgoing marketing type people can be quite difficult, because what you need to do is you need to turn up to a meeting, you need to agree a set of objectives, and then you just need to let people get on with their work and essentially don't disturb them with random ideas of interesting products or interesting apps that you saw on the subway on your way home. You might have heard of agile working ways. So that basically means that instead of creating a technical spec for something that your team is going to do for the next 6 months, that's kind of the old way of working. That's let's call it the GM way of working, where you're making this car. A weekly sprint is an agile way of working. So you're creating something, you're releasing it, you're seeing how it goes, and then you're re-releasing. But remember that developers tend to work on one thing at a time. So because they're working at one thing at a time. They're making one specific feature. There's really no point of you going to them constantly and saying, I saw this thing, this is interesting, let's do this, let's do that. That really annoys people, that really annoys developers. I have annoyed developers in my time by doing this, so don't do it. So document your ideas. If you have random interesting ideas, put them somewhere. So we generally put them in Trello. Trello is a task management software. Just put them somewhere, and then in weekly sprints, decide which features you're going to be making. Let's continue. Oh, by the way, I'm going to be going into this in much more detail in an online course that's launching next week. So there'll be some more details on this at the end of the session and in an email that Adam is going to send as a follow-up. But don't worry if all of this seems like a lot of content. It's a lot of content. It's a lot of content to cover in such a small amount of time. So I think that I have often seen founders try to do, and I stop them whenever I see this, because it's a very expensive mistake to make. So don't make this mistake. When you have a startup idea, maybe you've spoken to the fabulous Waverly Deutsch, who's the professor of entrepreneurship at Chicago Booth, whose class I still wake up from in a cold sweat. If you've got your idea, even if you've got a business plan, the thing to do next is not to hire developers. Do not hire developers. What you need to do is you need to hire designers. That's going to be your, in terms of your product team, that's going to be your first ever hire, not developers. So please remember that. Otherwise, it just gets too expensive. So let's read this quote from Mr. Jobs. What does this actually mean? When I first started working in this field, I thought designers made beautiful things, and that's all they did. So I thought either of interior designers or furniture designers or clothing designers. I had no idea what UX design was, had no idea what UI design was. So I think that's the case for most people, because I don't think anybody comes out of the womb screaming UX. So when you are thinking of your tech product, you need to think about two things. You need to think about the usability and the beauty. And if your product is not usable but beautiful, that's useless. Whereas if your product is really usable but really ugly, people are not going to want to interact with it. So I think if you're going to write anything down, I would write down this phrase, that your aim, the aim of your product is to provide a solution or value with ease and delight. That's really, really important. So beauty and utility. That means that, you know, when you are on an app or you're on a website and you want to buy something and you just can't figure out where your cart is, and once you get into the cart, you have to fill out 22 different fields for your registration, and they seem to be completely and utterly useless. And you're just thinking, oh my God, all I want to do is buy a Brita filter. Why the hell do I have to do all of this stuff? So that is bad usability. That's bad user experience. So even if the design and the font and the colors are beautiful, if it takes you ages to achieve what you want, or if you can't figure out how to get there, that's really, really bad user experience. So when you are hiring a designer, either as a product manager in your big tech company job, or as a non-technical founder, you need to focus on, you need to understand whether your designer understands people and whether not just beauty. So for example, look at their portfolio and then have a look. First of all, obviously see if their aesthetic matches with yours. Because generally aesthetic, if somebody has this particular aesthetic and you try to change it too much, it's not going to work that well. But also see whether they think about people and usability. And that's something that you can tell when you actually interview them. So just ask them a question. You could pick something out of the portfolio and you could just say, tell me about this. Tell me about when you made this website. And then you can see, well, if they start telling you that this particular website won lots of awards for its design, then great, fine, but that's not going to be that useful. But if somebody says that they made this website, the conversion wasn't great, so then they made changes X, Y, Z, which lifted up the conversion. But then they did a bunch of user testing and they realized that actually they were completely focusing on the wrong thing and users wanted something else. That's exactly the kind of person that you want. You want somebody who is user testing and understanding user behavior. Design in terms of technology is basically mixing the aspects of technology, psychology, and beauty all together. Your designers have to be the closest people to your user. So you and the designer generally are going to be working very, very closely together. And you're going to be doing lots of user interviews and essentially trying to get into the heads of the user. Because when you make a prototype, when you're making new designs, they have to be intuitive. As I'm sure if you open up any of the apps on your phone right now, you're not going to have instructions on them. Instead, you'll have just a few buttons, and yet you somehow know what to do. So that means that the process is intuitive. So your designer has to understand the user's intuition. So for example, if you're making an app for women, try to get a female designer. If you're making an app for doctors, you probably won't get a former doctor who's become a designer, but you might get a designer who is married to a doctor or whose mother is a doctor. So intuition here is really important. So after you've got your idea and you found your designer, you work with a designer to make a clickable prototype. There's lots of free software that you can use to make clickable prototypes yourselves. So if you want to start doing that right now, you can. It's quite fun. But splashing out on a good designer to make a clickable prototype is actually it's a really good investment. When you make a clickable prototype, basically the clickable prototype has to look and feel like an actual real product. So it has to feel like an app. So you will actually be able to click buttons on a prototype and those buttons will be able to link you to other screens. That's what a prototype is supposed to be like. It's really important that you create a prototype and then you test it amongst your target audience to understand whether they would use it and how they would use it. The reason here is that, oh, by the way, really important that you don't just ask your friends, because your friends generally will want to be nice to you and they will just say, yes, it's perfect. So literally get your target audience, strangers, get them to test your prototype and get feedback. You need at least 4 people to test your prototype because at least 4 people basically see most of the 85% of the errors in that prototype. If you want to understand more about prototyping, there is a book called Sprint, the Sprint Method, written by a couple of Google Ventures partners. That's really, really good on this topic. So once you've got your prototype and it's been tested, and you've probably then had to make another prototype, what you then need to do is only then you go and you give it to developers. So that's going to be stage 3 of our process. However, what's really important in this situation is that you learn to create a technical specification for your prototype. Now, everybody on this webinar, everybody who's watching this recording is capable of writing a technical specification because it is really, really simple. It's just incredibly boring. So it is literally just a set of instructions to each screen. So for example, I don't know, just open any app on any screen on your phone and take a screenshot of that and just write a description. What is the point of the screen? So what is it supposed to do? What buttons does it have on it? What happens when you click those buttons? Is there an effect? Is there like I don't know, an explosion, or is there other kind of birds chirping or something? Do they swipe? And once you click on a button, where does that then take you? That is literally a technical specification. And once you make a prototype, or once you have a design, next to each screen that you and your designer have worked on, you need to write out this instruction that then goes to your developers. It is very, very boring to do, but it is really, really important to do. Kind of like accounting. So the reason why it's so important is things get misinterpreted. Even when you have a clickable prototype and you think that it's all very clear, it's still not. Without a specification, you are still leaving room for interpretation. And generally, because developers tend to be quite far away from your end user, they will misinterpret things. So if you haven't written correct instructions, you can't then blame your developers for creating something that you didn't want. Because if you're leaving them to make their own decisions about what specific features are supposed to do, then it's possible that you will disagree. So I find it interesting that for the job of a non-technical founder, actually, the issues where you're most likely to waste money or get things wrong, it's not to do with technology, but it's to do with laziness and common sense, basically. If you can't be bothered to write a technical specification, or, I mean, honestly, I couldn't be bothered to write them, so our designer started writing them. My job was then to read them with a fine-tooth comb. So if there's somebody who's really good at writing them, fine, but just make sure you are reading them. So basically, don't let laziness or lack of focus get in your way, because those tend to be the problems that trip you up, not the fact that you don't know how to code. So now that you've got your set of screens created by your designer, who is very good at user experience and user interface, you've got your set of screens, and you've then got your technical specs, you are finally going to develop it. So let's delve into what you're going to do with them. So your backend generally comes first, and then your front end gets made. So what the hell is this, you're thinking? So a backend is essentially kind of like the foundation of a house. So, and the front end is, for example, like the doorknob on the door. So imagine if you had a perfect foundation, great walls, really, really good structure, but you didn't have a doorknob. That means that nobody would actually be able to get in the house and nobody will be able to use it. So you can't have a back end without a front end. Equally, if you just had a doorknob and no house, well, you just have a doorknob. What are you going to do with that? Maybe use it as a weapon, but apart from that, not very useful. So the back end and the front end need to coexist together. This is my little drawing of you having a WhatsApp conversation with your friend. So this is a front end. This is literally me writing a message to my friend saying, I'm running late, see you in 10 minutes. That message then goes to the back end. The back end is also often called the server. Ooh, yeah. And then it goes to my friend's app. So a front end is the interface. It is literally the thing that you, human, can see with your eyes, can feel with your fingers, and you can interact with. So a front end, if you want to write this down, a front end is a computer that speaks to humans. In order for your computer, in order for your app to actually work, or in order for your website, whatever product you have, in order for your product to work, you also need a backend which stores information and holds data and enables communication. So in order for communication to happen, your product, so your app, needs to talk to other apps. So for example, let's talk about Tinder. Tinder, you could own, I haven't used it for a while, but I think, so you could log in to Tinder using Facebook. So Facebook would then import information about you. So that basically means that Facebook's backend is going to be talking to Tinder's backend to create what might be a positive experience for you. So that means that a backend is a computer that talks to other computers. Again, you might want to write this down. Backend, computer that talks to computers. Front end is a computer that talks to humans. Here is another WhatsApp conversation. So this is you in a group chat. You talking. This is you in a WhatsApp group chat, and this is when you send information, it goes to the server. The server then redistributes it to your other friends. So that means that without the server, no messages that you send are actually going to get delivered. So for example, if your internet is switched off, you are not communicating with the server. You're only sitting in your own front end. So if you are on airplane mode, you are not connected to the server. This is important because there are some apps that you're probably using all the time that can function very well without a server. That's very rare, but if this is what you want to do, it's possible. So for example, your iPhone camera app, it doesn't need a server to function. So you can take lots and lots of photos and you can keep them on your phone. You can upload them to iCloud storage, but that's another aspect of it. Right, let's move on. Actually, so you will have some people who call themselves full stack engineers. So a tech stack is basically the back end and the front end. So they'll call themselves a back end developer or a front end developer or a full stack developer. In general, back-end developers tend to be more expensive than front-end developers. And if somebody says to you that they're a full-stack developer, be really wary. It doesn't mean that they're lying. It just means that they're probably more experienced on one aspect than on the other aspect. Because you will be able to see how people interact with your product, and you as a human will actually be able to interact with the front bit. It's far more dangerous to get the back end hire wrong than the front end hire. Because if something is wrong with the back end, you as a non-technical person won't be able to see it for a really long time. Right, we are coming to the end, almost, we're getting there. So, as I was saying, because working with developers in some ways is actually the most dangerous bit, because they're both the front-end developer and the back-end developer are doing things that you can't do, and you can't look at their code and say, this code is rubbish, it should be like this, redo it. You can't do that. And if the backend has issues, you will generally only figure it out after it's been built and it doesn't work properly. So what can you do in this situation? You can't mitigate for everything, but one of the things you can do is if you go back to your technical specs, so you've got your really good set of instructions, and you're at your weekly sprint meeting, what you should be doing in that weekly sprint meeting is that everybody should come to that meeting having read the technical specs. When they read the technical specs, you ask them, does anybody have any questions? In general, if everybody says no, everything is really clear, that means they haven't read them. Or they read them when they're on the subway with, they're facing somebody's armpit, which kind of means they also haven't read them. So what you need to do is you need to make sure that everybody reads it. If necessary, go through each screen with all the specifications with your team on the call or on the sprint meeting. Then your backend developer will explain to you what needs to be done. So what aspects of the backend need to be changed? What other computers, so what other backends do they need to link to? Do they need to link to Facebook, for example, or to Google Maps? You can then ask them, how long will that take? Equally, you can ask your front-end developer. Most of the time, front-end development takes less time than back-end development. So that's something to think about. If you see that your back-end developer says, this is going to take me 5 days to create, and your front-end developer says, but this is going to take me 3 days to create, it's your job to notice that there is a 2-day gap. So then just ask, what are you going to do with those 2 days? Most of the time, there's code to be tidied up. Most of the time, there are screens that are so old, they completely don't look in line with your branding, so they need to be changed. So most of the time, there is work to tidy up. Just like in business, there's boring admin that we put off because there's more important stuff to do. It's the same with code. But just as long as you know and you ask the question, first of all, you know what's being done. And also, generally, if people say they're going to do something and they tell you in front of their colleagues what they're working on, you're generally going to get honest answers. When you're getting your updates, make sure that they are at a set time, that everybody knows when to expect them. So get weekly updates and don't just turn up every day saying, oh, is it ready yet? Because if they told you it's going to be 5 days, then just leave them for 5 days. Don't be like the annoying child at the back of the car saying, oh, we're there yet. If you want to work with outsourced developers, totally fine. I work with outsourced developers. I'm very, very happy with them. And happy to introduce them if need be. So, Adam, this is our next poll question to the audience.
Yes, so that question, if you switched your phone to airplane mode, would the app still work? And I think this is asking you to reflect a little bit on some information you just heard. And yeah, so go ahead and make your response, and I'll share out the results in just a few seconds. All right, give another second or two if anybody else has not made their response yet. Alrighty, so we have a pretty good spread here, 56% that said no, 18% that said yes, and 27% that said they have no idea or unsure.
So first of all, well done for the people who admitted that they don't know. It's important to do that. But the correct answer is no, it would not. So if you're on a plane and you're trying to send a message on WhatsApp to your friends, your phone is on airplane mode. Thus, it is not connected to the server. So you've only got your front end working, no communication with the back end. So the app does not perform the function that it's supposed to do, which is communicate with your friend. In some ways it still works. You can look at messages, but it doesn't actually do its main function. Now we're going to speed through analysis because I know we're supposed to be finishing. So basically, once you have created your product, it has been developed. What you need to do is you need to make sure that you track how it's being used. So unlike that car that we were talking about, that people are just buying and doing whatever with it, and you don't know, you literally need to track the funnel. So you need to see which buttons are people pressing, and at what screen or at what stage of your process do people decide to abandon you. So this will help you to understand whether the thing you've made is useful, what the good bits are and what the bad bits are, and then it can help you work out what your North Star should be next and what you should focus on improving. So this is an example analysis. So how many people go from download to purchasing a subscription? So you can see that there are several steps. So download, registration, viewing content, free trial, and purchase. So obviously, if this is 100, where in this whole process are you losing people? That's a funnel that you can analyze, and you can constantly do things to improve conversion from one point to another. This is very heavily linking your product to your business model. So the thing that we talked about, build, measure, learn, that's a concept that's really pervasive in the technology industry. And it's a kind of a good life philosophy as well, I find. So let's wrap up. This is essentially what we've talked about. So idea to designers, to creating a prototype to test it, then to back-end developers, to create the back end, then the thing you interact with, so the front end, then a bunch of testing in various different ways that we will go into in the course, then analysis and more ideas, and then back again. So finally, if you want to delve more into this, I will be teaching an online course starting next week, and Adam is going to send some more information out. But essentially, this was just a taster of what we'll be covering. But I would love to hear your questions. Adam, do we have any?
Absolutely, yeah. So yeah, we'll get to as many as we can here in our remaining 10 minutes or so. Our first question, when raising funds, how do you address the question about why there isn't a co-founder with a technical background, if that is the case?
So that's a question that a lot of investors like to ask, and I think that comes from watching Silicon Valley and thinking that we should all be like Mark Zuckerberg. So the reality is that having two people quit their well-paid jobs to work on something that probably won't work out, it's really expensive. We live in the real world. So Mark Zuckerberg was a college kid. He could live on campus. I'm assuming most of the people here are no longer at college, so you actually have to pay your rent. So how are you going to pay your bills, basically? So that's a problem that I've had to deal with. Some investors don't like it, but a lot of investors now don't mind because code is now kind of a commodity. Again, if you're doing something very complicated, it isn't. But there are so many outsourced development firms that are really good. Making apps is not really that difficult. So actually, if you've got a really good understanding of the process and you understand how your technology can be commercialized, then that's far more important than somebody who can write code, because there are lots of people who can write code. I would argue that there are actually more people who can write code than know how to make money out of writing code. So if you know how to do that, then you should be really proud of yourself. Any more?
Yes, we've had a few attendees ask about, if you do not have that friend that works at Facebook, where do you recommend looking for capable designers and developers?
So startup hubs are quite useful. So places where there are lots of startups. So co-working spaces will often have events. So go to those events. See if you're with the University of Chicago. See if you can get involved with the Polsky Center in Chicago. What kind of events could they introduce you to? Don't worry so much about having a like a designer as a friend. I mean, if you want to have them as a friend, great. But the kind of advisor that would be great is an actual developer. So once you find that person, you can actually also just write to them on LinkedIn. Meetups. So if you actually go to the website Meetup, there are lots and lots of developer meetups. There are definitely lots in London, so I'm assuming there are lots everywhere. Developers like to get together and learn things, so go to those. But what you need to remember is that you are asking them to help you, so you need to offer them something in return. In general, there are developers who will then want to go into senior management and essentially want to become CTOs. In order for them to be a CTO, they need to understand how their technology translates to business. And you need the opposite. You need to translate your business to technology. So if you basically say to them that by working with you, they'll be able to get these skills to essentially progress their career, that's a really, really good sell. That could be a compelling sell to the right person. So be proactive, use meetup groups, reach out on LinkedIn, go to co-working spaces, go to startup hubs, and basically treat it as kind of as a skills share arrangement. You giving them the business and commerce aspect, and them giving you the technical aspect. And that way they can learn without leaving their super well-paid job with free food and ping pong. Any more?
Yes, also on the topic of reaching out to developers, how do you best protect your intellectual property when you are hiring or outsourcing people as a non-technical person yourself?
Well, I mean, you've just got to sign a contract. So you always, if you're doing a contract with anybody, basically, if you're hiring somebody to work for you, the basis of their work is that they are giving you that intellectual property, so it's all signed over to you. So contracts here are really, really important. Yeah, they could theoretically run off with it, but in terms of ideas, people often ask about this, but honestly, ideas are a dime a dozen, and it's the execution that counts. So, before Facebook, there was MySpace. So the idea for a specific the idea for a social network was already there. And Facebook won not because they had superior code, but because they basically had a better marketing and business strategy. And actually, they had better design as well. So it wasn't so much about somebody stole the code and they reproduced it. So definitely get your contract sorted. But beyond that, don't worry so much about people stealing your idea, but worry more about executing your idea in the best way you possibly can. Any more?
Yeah, I think we have time for maybe one more question, and that is in regards to machine learning / AI components of platforms, what additional team members and product management or design background do founders need, or is that treated like a feature to a product itself?
So basically, for both of these things, you need lots and lots and lots of data. Generally, you need demographic data and you need behavioral data. So demographic data is, you need to find out who your users are. So gender, age, where they're from, etc., etc. And then once they get into your product, so, let's imagine Net-a-Porter or Amazon. Once they get into your website, what kinds of things do they buy? What's the average size of their basket? When are they most likely to buy? Is it Wednesday at 8 p.m. for some reason? Once you understand their behavior and their demographics, you can then essentially make a predictive algorithm, which essentially says, when when a 34-year-old woman from a big city living in this area code gets onto our website on Wednesday at 8 p.m., she is likely to spend $500. Because of that, we are going to create a super amazing user experience for her and send her all these offers because she is actually likely to be a fairly big spender. Whereas, and they will know that even if they've never seen this particular 34-year-old woman before, but they've seen so many 34-year-old women from this particular this kind of background that they kind of can expect how she's going to behave. So as you can see, you need a lot of data and you need some commercial thinking here. You also need a basic understanding of statistics. If you went to Chicago booth, I don't think you need any more than the kind of introduction to statistics course we took during the MBA. You could just refresh yourself there. If you want to be a data scientist, there are lots and lots of courses, but essentially in terms of learning what you need to do is you need to use logic and ask the right questions. So your data scientist in general is not finding that they're finding the answers, but you have to ask the right questions. So for example, you can say something like, what characteristics do our biggest spenders have? Or how can we determine whether a customer is going to be in our top 10% customers this week? And then a data scientist will be able to use data and their own intuition to basically come up with those answers. So in terms of the kind of training I would take, I don't think you really need much more than understanding business and understanding basic statistics, because that's really that's the basis of an algorithm and then a machine learning mechanism. I hope that makes sense. Any more?
No, I think it's a good time for us to wrap up. So thank you so much, Sophia, for sharing your expertise on this important topic for both current and aspiring entrepreneurs. Keep a lookout in that post-event email I'll be sending today, everyone attending, for information about the online course that's starting. If you are interested in going deeper into this cycle and the topics that Sophia shared. We do also have 2 other upcoming events next week. So we have an online industry networking session on our UChicago Connect platform. That's on Tuesday, the 28th at 12 Central. And then the following day, on January 29th, we have another webinar at our typical noon start time on finding the work you love after 50. So if you're looking to explore different strategies and ideas for an encore career or a job search later in your career, that will be a really valuable presentation as well. And you can, as always, visit our events page at careers.uchicagoalumni.org for a full list of our upcoming programs. Once again, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Sophia, and have a great rest of your day and rest of your week.
Bye.